Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of the most dangerous and underexplored parts of Victorian life, snack time. We're talking about street pies with more rats than meat, candies with more lead than sugar, and snacks so toxic, your modern digestive tract would file a restraining order. So before you get comfortable, please take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And leave a comment letting me know what time it is for you and where you are listening from. Now dim those lights, turn on a fan for that gentle white noise, and let's get cozy for a journey into culinary chaos. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered how people survived a world where your lunch could double as rat poison? Did Victorian kids really eat candy so bright it could blind a mole? How bad did food have to be before even a starving urchin would say, "No thanks, I'm good"? Did Victorians ever check the ingredient label? Or was the label just a suggestion? And would you last a day snacking in 1850s London? Or would you become a cautionary tale on an arsenic poster? Congratulations! You've just woken up in 1852. You're hungry, you've got a single grubby penny in your pocket, and every street vendor is eyeing you like a pigeon eyes a breadcrumb. Welcome to the deadliest snack aisle in history. The air is thick with coal, smoke, horse sweat, and the unmistakable aroma of fish, pastry, and regret. You scan the cobblestones for your breakfast, dodging puddles whose ingredients are better left unknown. Victorian street vendors hawk their wares from battered carts, promising pies, buns, and questionable confections. Each shout of hot pies, fresh buns, is both an invitation and a threat. Do you trust the mustachioed man selling eels, or the child waving a basket of what might be apples or turnips in disguise? Let's set the scene. It's early morning, and the sun hasn't so much risen as coughed politely behind a thick layer of London smog. You're already late for work, your boots are soaked, and your stomach is making noises that attract stray dogs. And right there, between two piles of mysterious debris and a horse contemplating existential dread, is breakfast, Victorian style. There are more vendors than you can count, all hustling for your coin. One is selling fresh muffins, another offers dripping slabs of bacon that appear to be mostly fat and wishful thinking. The competition is fierce, but so are the health risks. Everywhere you look, someone is promising salvation in the form of street food. But nothing is quite as it seems. That steam rising from the meat pie cart. It's doing more to mask the smell than to advertise freshness. Vendors shout over each other, promising the finest jellied eels, new laid eggs, and hot plum duff. Though no one has seen a plum anywhere near these stalls since the last Jubilee, you eye a basket of fruit, marveling at the vibrant, waxy sheen of each apple. A closer inspection reveals half of them are suspiciously hard, and the rest are bruised like they've just returned from a boxing match with an irate cab horse. The Victorian street vendor is a master of improvisation and illusion. There are pies here, yes, but there's also the lingering rumor that anything not nailed down, or already partially decomposed, might end up in one. Sawdust makes a surprisingly convincing filler, and more than one pigeon pie contains as much actual pigeon as your average Victorian love letter. 0. If the meat is a little tough, it's not undercooked, it's just well traveled. You wonder if this is why the cats seem nervous and the dogs are missing. And yet, the prices are irresistible. For a single penny, you can walk away with a warm, dense hunk of nourishment that only occasionally bites back. Victorian vendors specialize in disguising yesterday's leftovers as today's fresh batch. You notice one enterprising young lad quickly scraping the fuzz off a bun before passing it along. Hygiene standards are more of a general guideline than an actual rule. If you can't see mold, it doesn't exist. If you can see it, it's just extra flavor. Then there's the charm offensive. Vendors are as much performers as they are cooks. They'll flatter you, joke with you, and invent elaborate backstories for their food. Caught fresh this morning, love. Never mind that the Thames is more soup than river. And fresh could mean anything from last night to last month. One particularly entrepreneurial woman is selling authentic Cornish pasties. Even though you saw her yesterday buying turnips from the next stall over and muttering about fake potatoes. Everyone is in on the hustle, and nobody is here to judge. And while you ponder your options, the city itself becomes part of the meal. Soot, dust, and whatever is wafting over from the tannery next door. These are the secret ingredients in every Victorian street snack. You take a tentative bite of a penny bun and immediately regret your choices. The outside is tough, the inside is doughy, and the flavor is somewhere between bland and industrial accident. But you chew anyway, because hunger, like hope, springs eternal. Even when the pie filling doesn't. As you make your way down the bustling street, you notice a cluster of children squabbling over the last sticky green sweet in a vendor's jar. The color isn't found in nature, and the smell could strip paint. But to them, it's a treasure. And really that's the magic of the Victorian street vendor. Amidst the danger and dubious ingredients, there's a sense of defiant joy. You're hungry, they're hustling, and together you make a bargain that will test the limits of your digestive system and your faith in humanity. Let's be honest, you might survive breakfast, or you might invent a new form of gastrointestinal regret. Either way, you're fueled for another day in the greatest, grubbiest city on earth, with a full belly and a renewed respect for food labeling laws. Next up, what's actually inside that pie? Spoiler. You probably don't want to know. It's time for lunch. You clutch your penny and make the brave decision to order a meat pie. The crust is warm, flaky, and hiding secrets. With every bite, you try not to think about the rumors. Pies packed with sawdust, spoiled meat, stray cat, or whatever the vendor found behind the butcher's shop that morning. You ask what's inside, and the answer is don't worry about it, love. Comforting. Let's take a moment to appreciate the Victorian meat pie. A marvel of culinary optimism and reckless abandon. You're standing at the cart, hunger overriding common sense, and that golden pastry glistens invitingly in the smoggy afternoon light. The vendor flashes a gap-toothed grin and assures you it's prime beef, with a kind of confidence usually reserved for snake oil salesmen and politicians. But you've heard the stories. Last week, someone swore they found a beak. The week before, it was a button. Is it urban legend, or just lunch? As you break open the pie, a wave of steam escapes, along with an aroma that can only be described as meat adjacent. It's hot at least, and the crust isn't bad if you like your pastry with the texture of a roofing tile. Inside, the filling is a mysterious brownish grey, generously sauced, and cut into shapes that would puzzle a professional butcher. There's something chewy, something gristly, and, if you're lucky, something resembling actual muscle tissue. If you're unlucky, it's whatever fell off the cart on the way over. Victorian pies are a masterclass in creative economics. Meat was expensive, so vendors learned to stretch the definition of filling. A little beef, a lot of offal, a handful of breadcrumbs, and a generous dose of sawdust for texture. The taste, let's call it complex. If you close your eyes and focus, you might detect a whisper of actual cow. More likely you'll find hints of whatever animal was closest to the chopping block that day. Rat, cat, dog, anything with legs was fair game. And if it didn't have legs, well, that just made it easier to stuff inside a crust. Some pies are bulked out with root vegetables or turnip, the sort of addition that's more structural support than flavor. It's not unusual to find a bone fragment or two. A little reminder that this was once a living creature, or at least a creature adjacent. In particularly lean times, the filling might be mostly gelatinous gravy, a sticky concoction made from boiled bones, random scraps, and the eternal hope that you won't notice you're just eating meat-flavored glue. Now, hygiene. If you're picturing a gleaming kitchen, think again. Most Victorian pie makers worked in conditions that would give your immune system a panic attack. No refrigeration, no running water, just a wooden counter, a dull knife, and the sort of apron you'd burn rather than wash. The meat is left out for hours, sometimes days, in the open air. soaking up the finest city aromas and local wildlife. Any germs that survive the baking process are simply considered extra seasoning. But there's an art to deception. Vendors knew customers were suspicious, so presentation was everything. The top of the pie would be brushed with egg, or whatever liquid was handy, for a glossy finish. Some even added decorative pastry shapes, a little flourish to distract you from the existential dread lurking beneath. And, of course, plenty of pepper. If you can't taste the meat, maybe you won't notice what it isn't. And yet, people bought these pies every day. They were cheap, filling and hot. 3 things hard to find on a London street corner. Besides, when you work 12 hours in a factory and your other lunch option is stale bread or a questionable sausage, a pie looks positively luxurious. Victorians didn't have the luxury of reading ingredient lists, so the answer to what's inside was always the same. Hope. So, you eat. Maybe you pause when you crunch something that shouldn't crunch, or when you find a mysterious tuft of fur in your filling. Maybe you say a silent prayer to the gods of digestion, and then finish your meal with a flourish, wiping your hands on your trousers and congratulating yourself for surviving another round of Victorian lunch roulette. And as you toss your empty pie tin into the gutter, you can't help but wonder, was that really beef? Or did you just eat history's greatest mystery meat? You may never know, but you're alive, you're full, and you're ready for whatever the afternoon throws at you. Next time, Victorian candy, and why every sweet treat came with a free side of heavy metals. Sleep tight. Your sweet tooth is tingling, and a tray of brightly coloured candies sparkles in the sunlight. Victorian confectioners have just discovered food dye, and unfortunately, so has the local undertaker. The candies are dazzling shades of emerald and crimson, thanks to generous helpings of lead chromate and arsenic. 1 bite might taste like paradise. 2 bites, and you're seeing angels. It's afternoon in Victorian London, and you find yourself drifting toward the sweet stall, hypnotized by the rainbow display. The air is thick with the scent of boiled sugar, burnt caramel, and just a hint of danger. In a world where most treats are beige, brown, or the color of uncertainty, these candies are shockingly, gloriously vibrant. There are pear drops as green as new grass, lemon bonbons that glow like hazard signs, and raspberry lozenges so red you half expect them to leave a mark on your fingers and maybe your insides. It all looks so innocent, but nothing in Victorian England is truly safe. The secret to that mouth-watering display? Chemistry. Victorian style. Confectioners are absolutely smitten with the latest scientific advancements. Why settle for dull sweets when you can create bonbons bright enough to guide ships through the fog? The answer: arsenic for green, lead for yellow, copper for blue, and a dash of mercury if you're feeling especially experimental. The result is a sugar shop that doubles as an entry-level toxicology lab. You reach for a penny sweet, not realizing you're about to take part in the great Victorian tradition of edible Russian roulette. The first taste is pure nostalgia, crunchy, tart, and delightfully sharp. The second taste? Well, now your mouth tingles. Your tongue feels a bit numb, and there's a metallic note you can't quite place. Maybe it's the copper sulfate, maybe it's your life choices. But in Victorian England, nobody's keeping track. If your lips are turning blue, you just look extra fashionable. Victorian parents, not yet armed with WebMD or concerned Facebook groups, simply trust the confectioner. After all, the shopkeeper's sign says finest sweets, and who would lie about candy? It's not uncommon for children to spend their hard-earned farthings on a handful of apple drops or acid drops, sucking on them all the way home, blissfully unaware that each piece is a tiny, fruit-flavored hazard. And yes, occasionally a child drops to the pavement, overcome by more than just a sugar rush. Doctors call it gastric distress. The rest of us would call it mild lead poisoning. But it's not just the color. The texture is suspect too. Many Victorian candies are padded out with chalk, plaster, or even powdered glass for that satisfying crunch. Sugar itself is an expensive import, so most sweets are about 20% happiness, 80% hazardous filler. Still, children line up down the street, arguing over whose tongue is the brightest shade of unnatural green. If your mouth isn't tingling, did you even snack in Victorian London? Candy makers are inventors at heart, always on the lookout for the next big trend. The 1850s see the arrival of gobstoppers, spheres so dense you could chip a tooth or bludgeon a rat with them. There's bullseyes, cough candy, and licorice pipes in cheerful black, made with industrial strength colouring, and sometimes a little tar on the side. And then there's Turkish Delight, flavoured with rose water and whatever was left at the bottom of the dye barrel. Safety standards, never heard of them. Candy was sold loose, scooped from open jars with fingers that had just counted change, petted a stray dog, and maybe picked something unspeakable from between the cobblestones. The only thing more dangerous than the ingredients was the hygiene. Occasionally, a scandal breaks out. Dozens of people hospitalized after eating peppermint lozenges, accidentally tainted with arsenic. The story makes the papers, but the solution isn't to ban arsenic, it's to hide it better. You'd think all this would scare off the customers, but it doesn't. The allure of bright, sweet, forbidden treats is too much. Children still sneak coins from their parents. Adults indulge their inner child, and the candy trade flourishes, because for all the risk, there's joy in every rapaless, possibly lethal bite. You finish your last acid drop, tongue tingling, teeth slightly gritty, and eyes just a little wider than before. Was it worth it? Absolutely. You survived Victorian Candy Hour, and that's a win by any standard. Next up, day-old bread and the heartbreak of pastries that could outlast most small mammals. Sweet dreams. Sometimes you just want something simple. Bread, surely, is safe. In Victorian cities, even a basic loaf is a gamble. The baker pads out the dough with chalk, plaster, or whatever is handy. If it's stale, you dunk it in weak tea. If it's still crunchy, you try not to chip a tooth, or question why it smells like yesterday's wallpaper paste. Let's set the scene. You wander down a busy London street, lured by the yeasty perfume of baking bread. Or is that just someone's chimney smoking out yesterday's trash? Your stomach rumbles. You have a penny in your pocket, and hope in your heart. And in front of you is the baker's stall. Baskets piled high with loaves of all shapes, sizes, and questionable ages. Fresh bread, the baker hollers, as he deftly swaps the older loaves to the front and the new ones to the back, just out of sight. In theory, today's bread is fresh and fluffy. In practice, it's more like a firm handshake from a mason. You pick a loaf that looks decent, golden brown, with a hard crust and that signature thud when tapped. The problem starts as soon as you try to break off a piece. If you don't have the forearms of a coal miner or a handy chisel, you're out of luck. Victorian bread was notorious for its density, often doubling as an improvised weapon or emergency doorstop. What should be soft and pillowy is instead dense, brittle, and gives off a faint aroma of wet plaster. You take a bite and suddenly realize the crunch isn't from the crust. It's from a mystery ingredient that was never meant to be eaten by humans or animals. Bread was supposed to be the staff of life, but in Victorian England, the only thing supporting is the local dentist's business. To stretch their profits, bakers mixed in all sorts of clever fillers, chalk for whiteness, alum for texture, mashed potatoes for volume, and if the flour sack was running low, a scoop of ground bone or sawdust for good measure. If you're lucky, it's mostly flour. If you're not, you're eating a chemistry set. That extra white bread, so prized by customers, owes its paleness to chalk or plaster of Paris, both easier to find than actual wheat. And then there's the issue of freshness. A loaf labeled today's might easily be from last week, artfully resuscitated by a quick splash of water and a few minutes in a hot oven. Bakers were masters of disguise. Is the loaf still warm from the oven? Or just strategically heated over a coal fire to lure in hungry customers? You'll never know. The only guarantee is that by the time you get home, your bread will be just stale enough to double as a cricket bat. Victorians weren't picky eaters, they couldn't afford to be. But they were resourceful. If the bread was too hard to chew, you'd slice it thin and dunk it into your mug of weak tea, hoping to soften the blow. Sometimes, if you were feeling fancy, you'd spread a bit of jam or dripping over it to mask the taste. And if all else failed, you'd feed it to the pigeons, or, if you lived near the docks, use it as ammunition against rival street urchins. Of course, eating Victorian bread wasn't just a test of dental fortitude, it was a gamble with your health. The chalk and alum could cause nasty stomachaches, and repeated exposure to plaster or sawdust did nobody any favors. It was not uncommon for doctors to see patients suffering from what was charmingly called bread belly, which is just as delightful as it sounds. If you didn't get sick from the fillers, you might still fall victim to mold or fungus. Since proper storage was more of a hope than a reality, you'd cut into your loaf and find a cheerful swirl of green or blue. Did you scrape it off and keep eating? Of course. In Victorian London, wasting bread was a crime against thriftiness. In the rare case you found genuinely fresh bread, it was a cause for celebration. People shared tips on which baker had the softest crumb or the least amount of extra minerals. Sometimes, neighbors banded together to pool their pennies for a decent loaf, dividing it like a precious jewel. And on special occasions, if you managed to get your hands on a sweet bun or a hunk of real white bread, it felt like eating clouds that didn't taste like wall plaster. So, you gnaw on your bread, jaw aching, sipping weak tea and reminding yourself, at least you're not eating a rat pie. There's a certain comfort in routine, even if the routine is a daily culinary dare. In Victorian times, survival was about making do, and, if you were lucky, keeping your teeth. Next up, the thrilling adventures of Victorian dairy. Spoiler alert, there's more chalk in the milk than in your bread. Milk arrives at your door in a glass bottle, or a tin can, if you're unlucky. In the absence of refrigeration, milk sours faster than your optimism. Enterprising milkmen refresh their product with chalk, water, and sometimes a dash of formaldehyde. You drink your morning glass and wonder why it fizzes. Let's step into the utterly unpredictable world of Victorian dairy. It's breakfast time. You stumble to your door in a city fog thick enough to butter your toast. And there he is, the milkman, whistling cheerfully as he delivers the day's ration of hope, disappointment, and potentially a minor gastrointestinal adventure. The bottle looks harmless enough, opaque, cool to the touch, promising nourishment for the day ahead. But you know better. Milk, in this era, is less of a health food and more of a wild card. Without the magic of refrigeration, milk is a race against time and the forces of nature. Fresh from the cow, it might last a few hours on a chilly morning, or approximately 3 minutes in the sweltering summer heat of a London slum. It's no wonder that by the time your breakfast cereal, or, let's be honest, your chunk of brick-like bread meets its milky fate, the contents of your bottle have begun an unauthorized fermentation experiment. Sourness isn't a flavor, it's a lifestyle. But never fear, the Victorian milkman is nothing if not enterprising. In a bid to keep business booming, many perfected the art of stretching their milk. No need for fancy food science when you have a barrel of tap water, a scoop of chalk dust, and a flexible relationship with customer loyalty. That creamy layer on top, sometimes chalk, sometimes mashed flour, occasionally a bit of mashed brain if you're truly unlucky. It thickens the milk and helps mask the taste of aged dairy. No extra charge for the mystery. And then, of course, there's the special occasion milk, when your milkman decides to try the latest trends in food preservation. Enter formaldehyde, the chemical best known for keeping frogs fresh in school science labs and, for a brief, disastrous chapter in food history, for keeping milk white and just the right side of not quite alive. A little dash could delay souring for a day or two, at the small cost of your internal organs waving a white flag of surrender. Did it work? Well, let's just say no one ever asked for seconds. If you're really craving excitement, you might find yourself on the receiving end of condensed milk in a tin can, advertised as both nutritious and indestructible. Victorian tins, however, had a tendency to leak, rust, or explode, infusing the milk with a rich metallic tang and the gentle fizz of low-level botulism. If the lid bulges, that's not extra cream, it's a sign to call your local undertaker. The consequences of these dairy experiments are as varied as they are dire. Children suffer mysterious stomach cramps. Grown men develop a lifelong distrust of anything white and opaque. Doctors chalk up the epidemic of summer complaint, Victorian code for food poisoning, to the mysterious workings of bad air, never suspecting the true culprit is sitting right there on the breakfast table, bubbling quietly in a porcelain jug. Still, milk is considered essential, and most people soldier on, dunking bread, diluting tea, and pouring it over their porridge with a grim sense of duty. Some develop an iron-clad constitution. Others simply lower their expectations until sourness tastes almost comforting. In the wealthier homes, milk is boiled, strained, and scrutinized, while the poor simply hope the ratio of water to chalk won't send them running for the privy. And let's not forget the cheese and butter. Two more dairy products with their own delightful hazards. Butter, if not fresh, takes on a certain aroma and a curious blue hue, perfect for scaring away both guests and the more cautious rodents. Cheese, meanwhile, develops its own personality, sometimes quite literally as maggots take up residence during the aging process. Victorians, ever pragmatic, simply carve around the moving bits and keep eating. Waste not, want not. So you pour yourself a bracing glass of milk, raise it to the morning sun, or, more accurately, the morning gloom, and take a cautious sip. If it tastes faintly of school glue, you've got the real thing. If it's fizzy, congratulations, you've discovered Victorian yogurt. Either way, you're ready to face the day, armed with nothing but optimism and a digestive tract forged in adversity. And as you set down your empty glass, just remember, in the world of Victorian junk food, sometimes survival is its own reward. Next, let's try something that can't possibly be any worse. A nice, hot, questionable fish pie. A cart rolls by, offering hot eel pies and pickled whelks. The aroma is both inviting and alarming. Freshness is a luxury, not a guarantee. You take a bite and play Victorian roulette. Will you walk away with a full stomach, or spend the afternoon inventing indoor plumbing from necessity? Welcome to the world of Victorian seafood street food, where the only thing more treacherous than the Thames at low tide is whatever just made its way into your lunch. It's midday, and the city's markets are a cacophony of barrow boys hawking their dubious delicacies. Hot pies, jellied eels, oysters fresh-ish from the river. Never mind that the river in question is a colour nature never intended, and is home to more floating surprises than a magician's top hat. You approach the pie cart with a mixture of hunger and dread, drawn in by the steam rising from a tray of freshly baked eel pies. Fresh from the river this morning, the vendor shouts, which is true, if you count fresh as still slightly twitching when chopped. The pastry is glossy and golden, painted with what might be egg wash or just the rainwater from last night's drizzle. With 1 shilling, you can experience a Victorian delicacy, and with 2, you can afford the optional side of pickled whelks, sea snails preserved in vinegar and optimism. You take your first bite. The pastry is dense, clinging to your teeth, and the filling is unmistakably fishy. There's a chunk of eel, glistening and chewy, and a gravy that's more gelatinous than liquid, having congealed in ways that defy the laws of physics and arguably basic decency. The flavour? Let's call it robust. If you close your eyes, you might taste the ocean. If you open them, you'll see something that looks suspiciously like a vertebra. And then there are the whelks, small, pale, and floating in a cloudy brine. A true Victorian would slurp them down and declare himself fortified. But you're not sure whether to eat them or offer them a tiny life jacket. The tang of vinegar is sharp, but it can't quite mask the underlying aroma of last week's tide pool. You swallow bravely, Wondering if you've just consumed more bacteria than nutrition? Why eel pies, you might wonder? The answer is simple. Eels were plentiful, cheap, and could survive long journeys in less than ideal conditions. In other words, they were the perfect food for a city with more mouths than morals. Victorian Londoners prized their eel pies for being filling and affordable, and, thanks to the natural resilience of eels, less likely to rot before making it to market. Less likely does not, unfortunately, mean never. If the cart spent a little too long in the sun, or the vendor was feeling especially thrifty, you could be treated to the unique flavor of pre-owned fish. And let's not forget the oysters. Once considered poor man's food, Victorian oysters were harvested by the barrel from riverbeds, no matter how dubious the water source. A plate of oysters was cheap, satisfying, and carried only a moderate risk of cholera. If you survived, you could brag about your iron stomach. If you didn't, well, there were always more hungry Londoners ready to take your place. Hygiene? A suggestion, not a standard. Vendors wiped their hands on aprons stained with mysterious fluids and handled money, pies and eels in a seamless cycle of cross-contamination. The same knife used to slice pies might have carved up a questionable herring moments earlier. There's a reason stomach pump was a thriving medical profession. Despite all this, the city's appetite for seafood never waned. Children munched on fried whitebait, adults debated the merits of potted shrimp, and everyone cheered when the pieman's bell rang out. Sure, you might lose a day to indigestion, but the taste of salty, savory eel was worth the risk. Or, so you convinced yourself, between sips of tepid beer. So you finish your pie, wipe the grease from your lips, and hope for the best. In Victorian London, eating was always an adventure, one that could end with a full belly, a night of regret, or a newfound respect for modern food safety. Next up, let's see what horrors lurk behind the dazzling display of Victorian sweets. Sweet dreams if your stomach allows. The most popular treat in the window glows a vivid, almost radioactive green. The secret? Arsenic. Victorian sweet makers prize colour above safety, and a handful of apple drops might earn you a trip to the doctor, if the doctor himself isn't part of the problem. Let's step inside the cheerful chaos of a Victorian sweet shop. Sunlight slants through grimy glass, illuminating jars crammed with lozenges, ribbons and sugar sticks in colours that simply don't occur in nature. Children press their noses to the window, eyes wide and fingers sticky from previous adventures. In the centre of it all, a pyramid of dazzling green apple drops sits like the crown jewels, each one gleaming with possibility, excitement, and just the faintest suggestion of doom. Victorian society was obsessed with colour. It didn't matter what was in your food, as long as it looked vivid, tempting, and worth showing off to your neighbours. Dull sweets didn't sell. So enterprising confectioners embraced the latest advances in industrial chemistry, armed with the conviction that if it doesn't kill you, it must be delicious. For green, nothing beat arsenic compounds, specifically Shields green or Paris green, both highly toxic, both absolutely perfect for making candy shine like a goblin's emerald. The process was simple. Add a little arsenic-based pigment to your sugar, heat it up, shape it into balls, and there you go, a treat as bright as envy itself. No one asked questions. The more unnatural the colour, the more children begged their parents for a penny to buy them. The results were both immediate and long-lasting. One bite gave a delicious, tart crunch. 2 or 3, and you started to feel a bite odd. Tingling lips, stomach cramps, and, if you were especially unlucky, a trip to the chemist for some Victorian-era medicine, likely a glass of brandy and a prayer. Parents, of course, were not much help. Food safety was a foreign concept. If little Tommy developed a rash, or little Elsie fainted on the way home from the sweet shop, it was probably blamed on nerves or the weather. Meanwhile, the local doctor, who may or may not have owned shares in the confectionery, prescribed rest, milk, or a brisk walk, rather than suggest the issue was the family's entire intake of heavy metals. And yet, the lure of those green apple drops was irresistible. For children raised on grey bread and boiled cabbage, anything that looked like pure joy was worth the risk. Kids competed to see who could eat the most in a single sitting, proudly displaying tongues turned neon by their forbidden snack. It was an era before ingredient labels, when the word natural simply meant it came from somewhere on Earth, and sugar could be defined as anything sweet enough to distract you from the taste of chemicals. The sweet shop was more than a place to buy treats. It was an experience, a social ritual, a test of daring, a chance to claim bragging rights and maybe a mild case of arsenic poisoning. The shelves were lined with green candies, blue lozenges coloured with copper sulfate, and red drops made bright with lead oxide. Each had their own risks, but none were as infamous as the green apple drop. The stories spread, of children who turned ill, of families who swore off sweets for a week or two, only to be lured back by that glimmering jar in the window. Of course, there were alternatives, plain toffees, licorice sticks, or candied nuts, but none of them could match the appeal of the forbidden. Even when the newspapers printed horrifying tales of entire schoolrooms falling ill after sharing sweets, the shops never really emptied. Victorian England, after all, was a place where danger was just another spice in the recipe. So you hand over your penny, clutch a paper twist of emerald drops, and pop one into your mouth. The flavour is sharp, sour, and undeniably thrilling. Is that a tingle on your tongue? Maybe. But hey, in Victorian times, a little risk is just part of growing up. Next time you crave a treat, you might want to check if it glows in the dark. If it does, congratulations, you're living the dream Victorian style. You decide to bake your own bread, imagining it's safer. The flour is white, suspiciously white. That's because it's been improved with bone dust, ground chalk, and sometimes brick powder. The only thing with less nutrition is the sack it came in. Let's set the scene. It's a chilly Victorian morning, and you're determined to seize control of your culinary destiny. The street vendors and their pies of mystery are behind you, the memory of day-old bread still lodged in your molars. You stroll to the local grocer, a few hard-earned coins clutched in your fist, and ask for the finest flour available. The grocer slides a sack across the counter, soft, powdery, and gleaming white, like the snow on a postcard. Except you know, deep down, that nothing in Victorian London is ever that pure. In an era obsessed with appearances, flour was no exception. Customers wanted bread as white as possible, a sign of refinement and prosperity. But wheat is costly, and honest living is even costlier. So, bakers and millers began padding their flour with all sorts of cost-cutting improvements. Some are almost poetic, bone dust from the local knackers, for that extra wholesome crunch, finely ground chalk, to lighten and brighten, and, for the truly budget-minded, brick dust from the nearest demolition site. It's red, it's gritty, and it's definitely not part of the food pyramid. At home, you pour the flour into a bowl and watch a pale puff rise into the air, settling like Victorian fog. The bread recipe is simple. Just water, yeast, salt, and, apparently, whatever was left in the undertaker's sweepings. You mix the dough, kneading it with a growing sense of dread, wondering whether that crunch under your palm is an errant wheat kernel or a piece of someone's former garden wall. You set your loaf to rise, but the yeast seems confused, confronted with a starchy graveyard of non-food additives. Still, you persevere. After all, you're baking from scratch. It's honest, it's homemade, and you can almost convince yourself you're eating healthily. In reality, the only health benefit is that you're strengthening your jaw muscles for future dental emergencies. The baking process itself is an act of hope. The kitchen fills with the scent of something almost, but not quite, like bread. When you finally pull your masterpiece from the oven, it's heavy enough to double as a home security device. The crust is suspiciously hard, and the inside boasts a mysterious greyish cast that no Instagram filter could fix. You cut a slice, watch the crumbs scatter, and brace yourself. The first bite is chalky and oddly metallic, a flavour profile more at home in a hardware store than a bakery. But in Victorian times, a belly full of something solid was better than a belly full of nothing at all. You chew thoughtfully, reflecting that improved flour was less about nutrition and more about survival, if survival means living just long enough to regret your meal. Of course, the Great Flour Scandal wasn't really a scandal at all, it was standard practice. Nearly everyone knew their bread was adulterated. There were occasional newspaper exposés, complete with stern warnings about the dangers of brick eating, and illustrations of skeletal millers cackling as they dumped dust into the flour bins. But enforcement was sporadic, and hungry families weren't about to argue with the one thing standing between them and hunger. The health effects were less than subtle. Chronic stomach pain, mysterious fatigue, and teeth that wore down faster than shoe leather. Children grew up thinking bread was supposed to taste like sandpaper, and that white teeth were a sign you'd never eaten a sandwich in your life. And yet, the habit persisted. The illusion of purity, bright, snowy loaves, stacked in bakery windows, was too powerful to resist. In moments of rare honesty, you might swap tips with your neighbors about the best way to improve store-bought flour. A little sifting here, a careful sniff there, or, if you were especially cunning, a friendly word to the miller to slip you the least adulterated bag. Occasionally, a local scandal would break out when someone found a button, a coin, or even a nail in their best quality flour. It was all part of the gamble. So you finish your slice of bone dust bread, jaws sore and dignity battered, but still, miraculously, standing. In Victorian London, surviving a meal was half the victory. Next up, what happens when you get thirsty and the drinks are just as improved as the food? Sweet dreams, and mind your fillings. A hot day calls for ice cream, and Victorian vendors are happy to oblige. Their secret ingredient. Often it's chalk, toxic colouring, or milk that's been left to ferment. You take a lick and hope the crunch is from sugar, not grit. Let's picture the scene. It's the rarest of days in Victorian London. Warm, breezy, and only slightly scented with the aroma of horse manure and coal smoke. Children are running through the park. Adults are fanning themselves on benches, and you, driven by heat and hope, wander over to the crowded ice cream cart on the corner. The vendor flashes you a toothy smile and points to a display of glorious, pastel-hued treats stacked high in glass bowls, already sweating under the weight of the midday sun. "Any flavour you fancy?" he boasts, which is Victorian code for, "All the flavours are basically vanilla, just dyed with whatever was lying around." You hand over your penny, and in return, receive a scoop perched precariously on a wafer so thin it looks like it was cut with a razor blade. The ice cream glistens in the light, a luminous pink, a suspiciously sunny yellow, and a green that can only be described as chemical optimism. It looks delicious. It is also, statistically speaking, a minor health hazard. Let's talk ingredients. Ice cream in the Victorian era is more of a concept than a guarantee. Real cream is expensive and spoils fast, especially in the days before refrigeration was anything more than wishful thinking. So, most street vendors stretch the mix with whatever's handy: watered-down milk, reconstituted powdered eggs, and plenty of chalk for extra body and that signature squeaky mouthfeel. You wanted a refreshing treat. What you're getting is more like a culinary dare. And that gorgeous colour? You can thank the finest in contemporary chemistry: arsenic for green, lead chromate for yellow, and the faint tang of copper sulfate for anything blue. It's less all-natural and more forbidden alchemy. The result is a treat so vivid it glows in the shade, attracting children, pigeons, and the occasional concerned physician. Victorians were enchanted by colour, believing that the more dazzling the dessert, the more delicious, and, naturally, the more healthy. That's logic for you. Hygiene? Well, let's just say the vendor isn't washing his scoop between customers. If you're lucky, he's not even washing it between weeks. Most ice cream is churned in wooden barrels, packed with ice harvested from questionable rivers in winter, and stored in cellars that double as rat motels. If you find a crunchy bit, there's a chance it's sugar, though it could just as easily be sawdust. A stray pebble, or the legacy of last winter's frost. There's also the milk. If your treat tastes sharp, that's not a secret recipe. It's just sour. Milk that's been left to ferment gives the ice cream a certain tang and an even greater risk of gastrointestinal adventure. No one ever really knows how old the cream is. As for eggs, they're often powdered, stale, or, on truly unlucky days, completely omitted. Modern food safety standards simply don't exist. If you survive the first bite, congratulations, you've already beaten the odds. Still, on a hot day, none of that matters. You lick your ice cream, savoring the instant chill on your tongue, the sugary hit, and the subtle undertones of existential risk. Children line up behind you, coins in hand, eager to chase away the heat with something cold, bright, and slightly dangerous. Occasionally, rumors swirl of outbreaks, summer fevers, mysterious stomach cramps, or that time when the whole of Mrs. Fenwick's Sunday school class spent a week confined to bed after a particularly lively outing at the park. And yet, the allure persists. There's nothing like an icy treat to make a city child feel rich, a momentary escape from the drudgery of boiled cabbage and crusty bread. In Victorian London, dessert is not just food. It's a gamble, a celebration, and a test of intestinal fortitude. So, you finish your cone, grit and all, and wipe your sticky fingers on your trousers. Maybe your stomach rumbles. Or maybe you just feel a little more alive. A survivor of another Victorian taste test. Next time you promise yourself you'll stick to water. But not really. After all, what's life without a little danger? Preferably served with a side of sprinkles. For a single penny, you can buy a pudding from a street stall. It's steamed in a battered tin, filled with raisins. And is that grit? You don't ask. You just chew and hope you survive until supper. Let's take a stroll down a bustling Victorian street, where food is as much about luck as it is about flavor. You're broke. Your stomach is rumbling. And the inviting clouds of steam rising from a vendor's pudding pot seem almost too good to be true. The vendor shouts, "Hot pudding, best in London," as he lifts a dented lid to reveal a mysterious, bubbling mass. You fork over your last penny, and a slice lands in your hand, warm, squishy, and suspiciously weighty for its size. This is the penny dreadful pudding, the budget dessert of dreams and indigestion. The smell is sweet, with hints of currants, treacle, and something less definable, possibly last week's leftovers. The texture? Somewhere between soggy bread and wet sand, with the occasional pocket of dried fruit clinging to hope. Victorian puddings were designed for economy and efficiency. If you could steam it, sweeten it, and shovel it into your mouth without asking questions, it qualified as pudding. The recipe for a true penny pudding is less about ingredients and more about what you can get away with. The base is stale bread, whatever's left over from the week, hacked up, soaked in watered-down milk, or chalky milk if the milkman's been at it again, and mashed into a paste. To this, the vendor adds sugar if he's generous, treacle if he's prosperous, and whatever dried fruit can be scavenged from the bottom of a barrel. Sultanas and currants are the usual suspects, but you might also get the odd dried fig, or a lone shriveled raisin that's seen better decades. Now, about the grit. Victorian hygiene was a suggestion at best. Flour and sugar were stored in open barrels, and kitchens were more often cellars or sheds than sparkling showrooms. A bit of grit in your pudding could be leftover flour, a rogue bit of sand from the street, or even the result of washing the tin out with river water and calling it sanitation. You learn quickly to chew carefully, and if you find something that crunches, you just hope it isn't moving. Despite these quirks, penny puddings were wildly popular. For many Victorian children, they represented the height of luxury, a rare, sweet treat in a life dominated by bland porridge and dubious bread. Street urchins would scrape together their coins for a single steaming hunk, eating it with their hands as they jostled for space on the curb. For adults, a penny pudding offered both comfort and calories, especially on chilly evenings when a warm belly could mean the difference between contentment and misery. Some vendors, to their credit, attempted to add a touch of class, a grating of nutmeg, a sliver of orange peel, or a splash of rum essence if they were feeling festive. But more often than not, these puddings were masterpieces of bulk, texture, and mystery. Steam was the great equalizer, softening even the hardest loaf into something nearly edible. If you got lucky, your pudding had a glossy top from a last-minute glaze of watered syrup, catching the light and your attention. And then there's the pudding skin, that thick, rubbery outer layer, formed by hours of contact with tin and steam. It's chewy, occasionally singed, and absolutely unpeelable. Some say it's the best part. Others say it's the most convincing argument for dental insurance in the 19th century. You finish your slice, licking sticky treacle from your fingers, and marvel at how a single penny could buy so much uncertainty and so little nutrition. Your hunger is gone, for now, and you've made it through another round of Victorian snacking roulette. You'll probably survive until supper, provided you don't chip a tooth or swallow something unidentifiable. Then again, that's just the price of living sweet, on a budget in the era of Industrial Revolution. Next up, pickled delicacies, because nothing says adventure like eating food that's been soaking in vinegar longer than you've been alive. You eye a jar filled with mysterious floating objects, eggs, onions, even pig's feet. Pickling is the Victorian answer to refrigeration, and the flavor is unforgettable. At best, it's tangy. At worst, it's biological warfare. Let's wander to the far end of a bustling Victorian market, where street vendors display their finest wares in cloudy glass jars, each one bubbling with possibility, and a few things best left unnamed. The pickling stall is an assault on the senses. Vinegar fumes so sharp they'll clear your sinuses for a week, a medley of spicy, sour, and just slightly off aromas hanging in the air. For the frugal, the curious, and the truly desperate, pickled food isn't just a snack, it's a gamble wrapped in tradition. In the Victorian age, pickling was a way of life, the great equalizer between feast and famine. When fresh food was as fleeting as a sunny day in London, preservation was the only way to guarantee a bite come winter. But while the idea was noble, the execution was variable. Nearly anything could be plunged into brine. Onions, cabbage, boiled eggs, carrots, and sometimes entire animal limbs. If it fit in the jar, it could be pickled. You approach the stall and try to identify what exactly is on offer. There's a jar of pickled onions, small and pale and bobbing like eyeballs in a haunted house. Next to it, a collection of eggs, some still with their shells, some ominously tinged blue. A great glass urn contains what the vendor swears are authentic pickled pig's trotters, their hooves pointing skyward as if in eternal surprise. And at the end of the row, a pile of gherkins so wrinkled they look like they've seen things. And maybe they have. The pickling liquid itself is no less mysterious. Proper vinegar is expensive, so many Victorians made do with whatever acidic concoction could be brewed, borrowed, or distilled from kitchen leftovers. Sometimes it's malt vinegar, sharp and brown. Other times, it's a blend of sour beer, old wine, and just a hint of regret. For extra flavor, a handful of peppercorns or a sprig of dill. For extra preservation, a bit of salt, usually enough to give you flashbacks to the Dead Sea. And in true Victorian fashion, a dash of copper sulfate or lead acetate for color. Because pickles, like people, are judged by appearances. Biting into a Victorian pickle is an adventure in itself. The first taste might be sharp and satisfying, bracing as a slap. The second, suddenly, you're aware that you've bitten into something that was once alive, then dead, then chemically reanimated by brine. The crunch is uneven, sometimes snappy, sometimes mushy, sometimes yielding an unexpected sandy texture. Was that sand, or just a bit of chalk left over from the cleaning barrel? You don't ask. If your tongue tingles, it's just the vinegar. Probably. Eggs are the boldest choice. Hard-boiled and shelved for weeks, they take on a rubbery quality that defies natural law. The yolks turn green, then grey, then a shade you'd only see in a thunderstorm. If you're brave, or starving, you'll try one with a pinch of salt and perhaps a chaser of beer, just in case. But if the vendor grins a little too wide as he hands it over, maybe ask yourself why he's not eating his own stock. Pig's feet, meanwhile, are for those who laugh in the face of texture. Gelatinous, chewy, and encased in skin that no amount of brine can truly tenderize. They're less delicacy, and more dare. But protein is protein, and in a world where every scrap counts, you take what you can get. For all their quirks, pickled foods were beloved by many Victorians. They brought brightness to bleak winter diets, a tang to endless meals of boiled meat and bread. Children traded gherkins at school. Adults added onions to pies and puddings for a burst of flavor. Some recipes have survived to today, though mercifully with fewer mystery additives. A testament to the resilience and creativity of Victorian home cooks and snackers alike. So you take another bite, eyes watering, taste buds in shock, and salute the inventiveness of the age. Whether you love them or loathe them, Victorian pickles are proof that hunger makes innovators of us all. Next up, drinks so dangerous, even your local apothecary would think twice. Thirsty? Soda fountains are all the rage, with concoctions colored by copper sulfate and flavored with the ghost of a lemon. Beer and ale, meanwhile, are bulked out with strange chemicals to keep you coming back for more, if your liver survives. Let's say you've made it through a meal of questionable pie, survived a side of day-old bread, and braved a pudding that may have contained more grit than grain. Your mouth is dry. You need something to wash it all down. In Victorian England, you have options, but all of them come with a price, and not just the one marked on the bottle. Soda pop is the latest craze. The Victorians, ever eager for novelty, have embraced fizzy drinks with a zeal matched only by their complete disregard for ingredient safety. At the corner chemist's or a bustling street fair, you'll find gleaming soda fountains promising an endless stream of refreshment. Behind the counter, the soda jerk mixes up glasses of effervescent liquid in a rainbow of suspicious hues: turquoise, radioactive yellow, magenta so vivid it glows. Each one is a chemical experiment served with a wink. The flavors are creative, if not exactly accurate. Lemon is more suggestion than substance, a faint whiff, a memory of citrus, and a mouthful of sugar chased by a sharp, metallic aftertaste. That zing. It's often thanks to copper sulfate, which makes the drink sparkle and gives your tongue a pleasant numbness. If you're lucky, your teeth don't tingle for hours afterward. For those who crave adventure, there's pineapple, with a hint of furniture polish, raspberry, suspiciously medicinal, and sarsaparilla, which is what happens when you let root beer go feral in a laboratory. But soda pop is only half the story. Beer and ale are the lifeblood of Victorian refreshment, consumed by young and old, morning and night. Water, after all, is a dangerous gamble in a city that treats rivers as public dumping grounds. But brewing beer isn't just about hops and malt, at least not when margins are tight and regulations are a distant dream. The average pint is a carnival of additives. Brewers stretch their product with everything from quassia bark and licorice root to bitter extracts, sugar beet syrup, and the occasional hand-me-down from the local chemist. Need your beer to look golden? Toss in a dash of lead shot to clarify the brew. Want to keep customers coming back? A little strychnine goes a long way, just enough to tickle the palate without, hopefully, dropping anyone in the street. Some ales are fortified with salt to drive thirst, while others boast a foamy head thanks to added alum or isinglass. Fish bladders, if you were wondering. Beer is a thirst quencher, a social glue, and an endurance test for the digestive system. Of course, the effects are legendary. The phrase drunk as a lord isn't just an expression, it's a survival strategy. If the ale doesn't get you, the after effects might. Blinding headaches, thunderous indigestion, and the suspicion that your pint glass was last washed during the Crimean War. But even these are preferable to the dangers of drinking unboiled water. which has been known to harbour everything from cholera to unidentifiable wildlife. And let's not forget the children. In Victorian England, beer is often considered safer than water, so weak small beer is handed out to kids with their breakfast. School children sip from foamy mugs, blissfully unaware they're developing a taste for something that could, in higher doses, stun a mule. If beer and soda pop don't appeal, you can always try the latest patent tonics, bottled drinks promising health, vitality, and eternal youth. Most are laced with opium, cocaine, or a proprietary blend of 18th century herbal regret. They might cure your headache, or simply convince you that headaches are character building. So you raise your glass, bracing for whatever comes next. In the Victorian era, a drink isn't just a way to quench your thirst. It's a gamble, a chemistry lesson, and occasionally a cry for help. Next up, tea time, where the only thing more dangerous than the tea is what's lurking in the sugar bowl. Bottoms up. Afternoon tea sounds genteel, but that teapot may contain more than you bargained for. Adulterated tea leaves, heavy metals, and recycled leaves ensure every cup is a surprise. Sugar cubes are pure luxury, if they aren't secretly gypsum. Let's step into the parlour. The clock strikes 4, the fire is stoked, and you're invited to partake in that most quintessential of Victorian rituals. Afternoon tea. It should be a soothing moment, a pause in the chaos of the day. Your host pours from a delicate, floral teapot, and the fragrant steam curls up, almost masking the scent of the coal fire and whatever's cooking down the street. On the table, cups as thin as eggshells, a little jug of milk, questionable provenance, see death by dairy, and, if fortune favours you, a plate of biscuits. But before you lift your pinky and take a dainty sip, you might want to ask yourself, do I trust what's in this cup? Let's start with the tea itself. Victorians loved their tea, so much that it became a national obsession and, for many, a non-negotiable staple of daily life. But demand always outstripped supply. Genuine, pure, high-quality leaves from India or China were expensive, and so the market was flooded with the affordable stuff. The sweepings from the tea warehouses, the dust from the factory floor, and, on especially thrifty days, used leaves collected from the cups of the previous day's customers. These were dried, re-dyed with copper salts or Prussian blue for that telltale fresh colour, then sold anew. It's recycling, Victorian style. Tea adulteration was so rampant that entire pamphlets and parliamentary commissions were devoted to exposing the fraud. Clever traders would bulk up their product with dried elder leaves, sloe, or even ground up twigs and iron filings for body. Some varieties had more in common with garden mulch than a Camellia sinensis plantation, and if you noticed a slightly metallic tang, congratulations, you've identified the presence of lead, copper, or mercury, all of which were used to deepen the colour and prolong shelf life. No wonder Victorians drank their tea strong. If you're going to ingest heavy metals, you might as well do it with conviction. If the tea itself didn't get you, the sugar might. Refined sugar cubes were a true luxury in most homes, a status symbol to display in your fancy bowl, and to be doled out with the sort of ceremony normally reserved for rare jewels. Unfortunately, with luxury came imitation. Some enterprising grocers, eager to stretch their profits, produced cubes from compressed gypsum or plaster of Paris, occasionally with a sprinkle of actual sugar for flavour. If your cube dissolves with a chalky sigh rather than a sweet sparkle, consider yourself part of the ongoing experiment. Milk, as discussed, was another game of chance. Fresh milk soured by midday and was often refreshed with a little chalk, water, or something even more alarming. Pour it in your cup and watch for curdling. If it fizzes, you're not having a magical tea party. You're witnessing the early stages of Victorian home chemistry. Even the teapot was in on the game. Glazes often contained lead, so each brew offered a hint of poison leaching into your drink. But it was all in good fun, right? What's a little cumulative toxicity among friends? Despite these hazards, tea time was sacred. It was a chance to gather, gossip, and escape for a moment. from the industrial grind. Children learned early to appreciate the ritual, if not the flavor. Adults debated the merits of different brands, often just different levels of adulteration, while the truly discerning added a splash of rum or gin to mask the taste and perhaps build immunity to whatever lurked within. You sip your tea, trying to focus on the warmth, the comfort, and the illusion of gentility. Maybe there's a crunch at the bottom of the cup, a stray twig, or a bit of brick dust from the premium blend. Maybe the sugar leaves a mineral aftertaste, or the milk floats like a science experiment gone awry. You finish your cup with a sigh, grateful for the ritual if not the ingredients. Next up, sausages, because if there's one thing more mysterious than Victorian tea, it's what ends up in a sausage roll. Sweet dreams. And may your cup always be half full, and only a little bit lethal. Hungry for a sausage roll? Victorian butchers fill their links with anything at hand. Offal, old breadcrumbs, and sometimes spoiled meat from last week's market. Sausage casings? Don't ask. Don't look. Let's step up to the local butcher's counter, where sausages dangle in proud rows, plump, glistening, and a little too eager to leave their mark on your napkin and your digestive system. You're hungry, desperate for something hearty, and the aroma of sizzling fat is just enough to make you forget all those whispered rumors about what goes into a Victorian sausage. Just for a moment. But before you take a bite, let's explore the magic of sausage making, 19th century style. The goal is simple. Waste nothing. In an era before industrial meat packing, every part of the animal was up for grabs. The prime cuts went to the wealthy. The bits and bobs, the offcuts, and the less identifiable regions were destined for the sausage grinder. It's the ultimate in nose-to-tail eating, except sometimes you're not quite sure what species the tail came from. The main ingredient. Offal, a charming catch-all term for anything that didn't make the dinner table. Liver, lungs, kidneys, connective tissue, and anything else the butcher couldn't sell outright. These bits were minced, mixed with breadcrumbs, stale naturally, and bulked out with whatever scraps happened to be lying around. Old bacon rinds, stringy beef, and the occasional surprise bone fragment made the cut. If it was vaguely edible, it went in. And then there's the meat that didn't quite sell last week, or the week before. Victorian preservation methods were, let's say, creative. Salt and smoke could only do so much, so a clever butcher would simply chop the less fresh bits finely, season them heavily, and hide them in a sausage. Spices were the original cover-up. A good dash of pepper, a sprinkle of sage, and you'd barely notice the tang of something that had aged a little too enthusiastically. Bread crumbs, oats, or even mashed potato gave the mixture body and helped it stretch. Nobody wanted to pay a whole shilling for a sausage that wouldn't last till supper. Filler wasn't a dirty word, it was a necessity. You'd be lucky to find a sausage with more than 50% actual meat. Some even claimed the casing was the best part, though this is only true if you're into culinary mysteries. And those casings, let's just say the less you know, the better you sleep. Most were made from cleaned animal intestines, but cleaned is a flexible term. A quick rinse in cold water and a promise to the customer was about all you could expect. Sometimes, if intestines ran short, creative butchers turned to alternatives. Old muslin cloth, parchment, or whatever thin tubular object was handy. If your sausage snapped when you bit it, you were either lucky or about to need a dentist. The result was a sausage roll that could be anything from a warm, savory delight to a culinary dare. On a good day, the fat sizzled and the spices worked their magic, filling the air with a meaty, peppery perfume. On a bad day, well, let's just say there's a reason Victorian stomachs were legendary for their resilience. Sausages were cheap, filling, and easy to eat on the go, perfect for factory workers, street children, and anyone who couldn't afford to be fussy. A sausage roll and a mug of beer was a meal, even if it sometimes doubled as a life lesson in skepticism. If you survived your lunch, you could brag about your iron constitution. If not, you had plenty of company at the local chemist's shop, seeking relief from digestive upsets. You polish off your sausage roll, Dust the crumbs from your jacket, and promise yourself you won't ask what was inside next time. In Victorian England, hunger was the best seasoning, and the legend of the sausage lived on, one dubious bite at a time. Next up, the gleaming world of street fruit, and why that healthy shine might not be as wholesome as you'd hope. Your beautician assesses you with a steely gaze. "We can fix that," she says, without specifying what that is. She pulls out a chart of head shapes, phrenology bumps, and the latest science from France, none of which is remotely reassuring. Welcome to the fascinating world of Victorian beauty, where a trip to the salon is less about pampering and more about scientific experimentation and thinly veiled insults. You sit, nervously smoothing your skirts, as your beautician, part artist, part amateur anatomist, and full-time busybody, prepares to give you a makeover based on the most cutting-edge theories of the day. And by cutting edge, we mean wildly speculative and about as accurate as predicting the weather by staring at a potato. She begins with the obligatory head pat-down. Not for lice, thankfully, though that's always a risk, but for phrenology, a pseudo-scientific belief that the lumps and bumps on your skull reveal your character, intelligence, and perhaps whether you'll look better with ringlets or a severe chignon. Your beautician's fingers dance across your scalp, stopping occasionally to scribble a mysterious note, possibly anxious, melancholic, or prone to spontaneous combustion. You're half tempted to ask if she's finding treasure. Out comes the chart, a masterpiece of Victorian nonsense, heads of all shapes, each linked to a personality trait, and a matching hairstyle. If you have a noble brow, she recommends the Grecian updo. If your cranium is narrow, she might suggest extra volume, with a little help from some horsehair padding, or a homebrewed tonic made of egg whites, and, on particularly experimental days, a splash of brandy. She peers at your profile, frowns, and measures the width of your jaw with a pair of brass calipers like a tailor at a particularly confusing fitting. Now, the science really gets going. She consults the latest French beauty journals, which promise miracles through scalp massage, galvanic currents, and magnetic hairbrushes. One article claims you can stimulate hair growth by vigorously brushing your hair, 100 strokes every evening while facing true north. Another recommends hair food, a thick, aromatic concoction with the consistency of axle grease and a scent reminiscent of yesterday's roast beef. She rubs it between her hands and explains, in soothing tones, that it's guaranteed to activate the follicles, though your scalp will spend the rest of the day looking as if you styled it with suet pudding. Politeness, of course, is key. At no point does your beautician ever say outright that your hair is dull, your skin is sallow, or your ears are the wrong shape. Instead, she frames it as an opportunity for improvement, for rejuvenation, or simply for following the Parisian trends that are sweeping the more fashionable parts of the empire. If you don't look like a statue from the Louvre, don't worry, there's a lotion, powder, or special hat for that. The whole experience is oddly soothing and deeply unsettling. You nod along as she recommends products that sound suspiciously like cleaning supplies. Arsenic face cream for pale skin, belladonna drops for wide eyes, and lemon juice tonics for a radiant complexion, and a stinging scalp. Each solution is offered with such gentle conviction that you almost forget you're paying someone to diagnose you with minor defects of the brow ridge. By the end of your consultation, your sense of self has been gently battered, plumped, and rearranged. You're sent home with a bag full of lotions, a head full of doubts, and a promise that, with regular treatments, you too can approach the impossible standards of Victorian beauty, or at least be more interesting to passing physiognomists. And as you walk out into the foggy London street, you realize that in the Victorian era, self-improvement is less about results and more about the ritual. A soothing cup of tea, a polite diagnosis, and the reassuring sense that there's always a new scientific fad ready to fix whatever you never knew was broken. Up next, street fruit, and the mysterious art of making apples shine like polished brass. Potatoes are cheap and filling when they aren't half green with solanine or cooked in rancid fat. You bite into one and wonder if your tongue will go numb. Sometimes it does. It's a rainy Victorian evening and you, exhausted and hungry, have wandered past the oyster stalls, dodged the eels, and decided to play it safe with the humble potato. After all, what could go wrong with a food so basic? It has kept millions alive through famine, revolution, and endless Mondays. Turns out, in Victorian England, even potatoes are a culinary minefield. You spot a vendor huddled under a soot-blackened umbrella, his cart piled high with steaming spuds. "Hot taters!" "Fresh from the oven," he shouts, turning each one expertly in the embers. The reality is those fresh potatoes have probably been living in the bottom of a cellar for weeks, sharing quarters with sprouting onions and something you really hope is just a beetroot. The skin is wrinkled, the flesh is mealy, and the aroma is an intoxicating blend of earth, ash, and possibly yesterday's stew. The first bite is hopeful, soft, salty, and warming. The second, however, is where things get interesting. Your tongue begins to tingle, and you notice the potato is sporting a greenish hue. The telltale sign of solanine, nature's own little warning label. Victorian science hasn't yet caught up with the fact that green potatoes are mildly toxic, so most people just scrape off the worst bits and hope for the best. A numb mouth is an accepted occupational hazard of eating on the cheap. And then there's the fat. If your vendor's feeling generous, he'll toss your potato in a ladle of dripping beef fat if you're lucky, pig fat if you're not, and whatever's left at the bottom of the pan if you're really pushing your luck. But in a world without refrigeration, that fat has probably gone on its own odyssey. From fresh to funky in record time. The result? A potato that's both greasy and oddly tangy, with undertones of why is this bubbling? It's comfort food with a hint of Russian roulette. Occasionally, you'll be treated to an extra surprise. An uninvited guest, lurking just below the skin, insects, tiny stones, and the ever-present grit of Victorian city life can all find their way inside. You pick them out and carry on, because that's just part of the charm. The alternative is hunger, and hunger is much worse than the faint taste of compost. For the truly daring, there's the potato pudding, a strange hybrid of mashed spud, breadcrumbs, and whatever sweetener or spice happened to be available that week. Some recipes call for currants, others for treacle or even leftover gravy. It's the Victorian equivalent of a fridge clean-out casserole, comforting if you're lucky, a crime against nature if you're not. Potatoes are also the poor man's dessert. Vendors will stuff them with cold cabbage, douse them in vinegar, or, on special days, offer a dab of butter so small you need a magnifying glass to spot it. Kids line up for potato skins, roasted crisp over open flames, then dusted with whatever seasoning could be found, often just more ash from the fire. Even in their simplest form, potatoes are a versatile blank canvas, one that often gets painted with whatever is handy, edible or otherwise. Of course, the potato is still better than the alternative. For many Victorians, it was a lifeline, a source of calories that kept the wolf from the door, even if it occasionally brought a stomachache instead. If you finished your potato without going numb, it was a win. If you didn't, well, you just drank a little more beer, and hoped the feeling would return by morning. So as you polish off your slightly green, slightly greasy, faintly mysterious spud, you remember, in the world of Victorian junk food, even the safest bets are a risk. Still, you're fed, you're warm, and you're only slightly tingly. Next up, what happens when your factory lunch is whatever you remembered to stuff in your pocket at dawn? Break time in a Victorian factory means cold tea and a slice of whatever's survived in your pocket since dawn. If you're lucky, it's edible. If not, you blame the headache on the smog, not the sandwich. The whistle blows, echoing through cavernous brick halls as dozens, sometimes hundreds, of workers wipe grime from their hands and make their way to a drafty corner or the nearest patch of sun outside. Lunch is a brief and sacred ritual, a pause in the relentless grind of clattering looms, roaring furnaces, and supervisors with eyes sharper than their pencils. You settle on a cracked stone step. Pry open your bundle and brace yourself for culinary surprise. Inside your lunchcloth is a slice of bread that's seen better days. Its crust hard as a cobblestone, its center seasoned with yesterday's pocket lint. If you're lucky, there's a sliver of cheese, slightly shiny around the edges, or a curl of bacon whose best days are firmly in the past. For many, a midday meal is just bread and cold tea, because tea, even when cold, is considered safer than water. It's a far cry from the steaming midday buffets of modern lunchrooms, but it's fuel for the next 4 hours of labor. Let's talk sandwiches. The Victorian worker's sandwich is an exercise in thrift and necessity. Bread acts as both plate and napkin, soaking up whatever fat or jam you could spare that morning. If you're fortunate, you get a smear of drippings saved from Sunday's roast. On special days, a dollop of jam or treacle, thinned with water to make it stretch, turns your lunch into a sweet treat. More often than not, though, it's dry, it's tough, and it tastes like a reminder of how far you are from payday. Meat, when it appears, is a sliver at best. A slice of ham thin enough to see the light through, or perhaps a cold sausage of mysterious origin and indeterminate age. The cheese is sharp, partly because it's aged, and partly because it's begun to develop its own personal philosophy. If you're especially unlucky, you find the factory special. Yesterday's potato, gone stiff and grey, but still edible with enough effort and imagination. Of course, factory conditions don't help the appetite. The air is thick with coal dust and the metallic tang of machinery, so your sandwich is inevitably seasoned with a sprinkling of soot. Hands aren't washed, there's no running water, only a communal bucket that's best left uninspected. You eat fast, guarding your food from rats, sparrows, and the ever-watchful eyes of your co-workers. Some days, a friend might trade you half a pickled onion or a chunk of pudding for a sip of your cold tea. Sharing is survival. You swap stories, news, and whatever edible fragments you've managed to gather. There's camaraderie in hardship, laughter in the face of mystery meat, and the unspoken understanding that nobody asks what's actually in the sausage roll. Dessert is a luxury. Maybe you've saved a bit of hard candy from a child's birthday, its edges blunted by days of pocket travel. Or perhaps a penny bun, bought on the way to work and now as dense as a brick, is all you have left. Even a bit of fruit, if it survived the morning's commute, is a treasure. You eat every crumb, because dinner is hours away and the factory won't stop for hunger. And what about the headache? Is it the smog, the noise, or the dubious lunch? No one knows. You down the last gulp of cold tea, hoping it revives you, and stand when the whistle calls again. Break time is over. The looms start anew. If your stomach protests, you remind yourself that tomorrow is another chance at a better lunch. So you tuck away your cloth, dust crumbs from your lap, and dive back into the day's labor. In Victorian times, eating on the job wasn't about nutrition or flavor. It was about surviving to see another break. Next up, the chaotic magic of fairground food, where even dessert can be a dare. A Victorian fairground is a festival of food, noise, and the gentle rumble of impending food poisoning. From toffee apples dipped in questionable syrup to fried dough as hard as cobblestones, the fun is always slightly haunted by indigestion. Let's set the scene. You step onto the fairground, greeted by the smell of horse manure, hot sugar, and something deep-fried that's probably illegal in 3 modern countries. The air is alive with the clatter of wooden games, shrieks from the penny amusements, and the sing-song cries of hawkers competing to sell you the next treat that might, just possibly, not kill you. Children drag their parents from one stall to the next, hands sticky, pockets lighter, and stomachs rumbling with a dangerous mix of anticipation and last night's bread. At the heart of this chaos, food. So much food. Toffee apples dangle from sticks like jewels, promising sweetness and a temporary escape from the realities of city life. The apples themselves are sometimes a day or two past their best, but the glossy shell of hardened sugar is thick enough to preserve anything short of a fossil. You take a bite, nearly chip a tooth, and discover that the toffee cracks in sharp, almost weaponized shards. Beneath the shell, the apple is cold, mealy, and occasionally sports a bruised patch that tastes of vinegar and regret. Next up, the fried dough. Every fare boasts its own take: fritters, crullers, donuts, and mystery lumps tossed in lard and dusted with sugar. The outside is golden, glistening, and mouth-watering. The inside is sometimes raw, sometimes hollow, sometimes more oil than dough. One bite, and you're not sure whether to savor the moment or schedule a dentist appointment. The trick to enjoying Victorian fairground dough: lower your expectations, and maybe don't ask what was in the frying pan before your treat. No carnival is complete without sweets, of course. Candy floss. Fairy floss in the flowery language of the day. Spins out in tufts of pastel pink and blue, sticking to every surface, and sometimes picking up bonus flavors from the passing breeze. Sugar was expensive, so the stalls often padded out their confections with starches, chalk, or whatever white powder was cheapest that month. Even the candy sticks are colored with the brightest and most questionable dyes chemistry could offer: lead chromate yellow, copper sulfate green, and the ever-popular arsenic green, for that little thrill of danger with your sugar rush. You move on to the savory stalls, where a chorus of sausages sizzles on grills, and the aroma of onions nearly masks the smell of frying fat. These are the domain of the mystery meat vendors, who've perfected the art of stretching a shilling and a recipe. Sausages are plumped with offal, breadcrumbs, and, when pickings are slim, bits of yesterday's unsold wares. One sausage roll might taste like heaven, the next like existential despair. The brave will try a pork pie, served hot or cold, with a wobbly layer of aspic that shimmers in the sunlight and looks alarmingly like Victorian glasswork. But it's not all fear and caution. For many children, a fairground treat is a rare taste of luxury, no matter what's lurking inside. Penny ices, served in battered glass or on a stick, offer icy relief on a hot day if you ignore the grit at the bottom and the mysterious flavor combinations. There are roasted nuts, burnt sugar tarts, and bonbons that stick your teeth together better than any dentist's glue. Yet everyone knows the risks. Stomachs begin to rumble, faces pale, and the fairground's true soundtrack emerges. The gentle chorus of groans as reality sets in. Maybe it was the cream bun left in the sun. Maybe it was the pickled egg, the eel pie, or just the mysterious soda pop colored like a peacock's dream. Still, no one leaves empty-handed or empty-stomached, just slightly more wary, and maybe a touch green around the gills. You stumble home, pockets empty, hands sticky and belly full of memories, some better left forgotten. At a Victorian fair, food was always part of the adventure. If you survived the day, you'd earned the right to tell the tale. Next up, childhood snacks. Because if you think adult food was scary, just wait until you see what kids could buy for a penny. Victorian children crave sweets, but pocket money doesn't stretch far. Half a penny buys a handful of bullseyes or licorice pipes, sometimes full of sand, sometimes full of something much worse. Let's travel back to a Soot Street street corner, where a knot of children in threadbare clothes press their noses to the glass of a sweet shop, or, more commonly, to the wooden counter of a cart set up in a bustling alley. Laughter and shouts fill the air as a few lucky kids count their precious coins, hoping to score something sweet, colorful, and, if fate allows, not lethal. In the land of childhood snacking, every penny is a passport to adventure, and every treat is a ticket in the world's cheapest lottery. The classic choices are legion: bullseyes, hard peppermint candies, licorice pipes, sugar mice, acid drops, and fruit lozenges the color of tropical birds. The more you look, the less you recognize anything nature ever intended to feed a child. Sweets are sold loose, scooped by hand into paper twists. The shopkeeper's hands are rarely clean, having just handled cash, patted a stray dog, and perhaps swept up yesterday's sawdust. Hygiene in this era is a theory, one not widely practiced. The candy itself is as much filler as flavor. Sugar is expensive, so every piece is padded out with chalk, starch, or plaster of Paris. If you're lucky, the bullseyes are mostly peppermint. If not, there's a distinct note of limestone, and the unmistakable crunch of grit. As for licorice pipes, they're chewy, black, and intensely sweet, unless you get one from the bottom of the barrel, where they fuse together into a single inedible brick, flavored by time, dust, and the ghosts of snacks past. Children quickly learn the difference between fresh and old. The best sweets vanish by mid-morning. The rest hang around, slowly losing their battle with humidity and gravity. Some unlucky souls might spend their penny on acid drops so sharp they strip the lining from their mouths, or on Parma violets that taste mostly of soap. The real gamble is not the flavor, but the aftermath. Stomach aches, loosened teeth, or, on particularly memorable days, a case of mild lead poisoning from brightly colored dyes. Street sweets aren't just for taste, they're for trading, sharing, and showing off. The bravest kids bite straight through a bullseye or crunch a jawbreaker in half. The less bold nibble at the edges, savoring each grain and hoping for a hint of actual flavor before the chalky core. If you're feeling flush, you might splurge on Turkish Delight, which comes in sticky cubes rolled in questionable sugar, sometimes still bearing the fingerprints of every child in the neighborhood. Of course, the snack category in Victorian childhood is a broad one. When pennies are short and hunger is long, anything edible counts. Roasted chestnuts, if you can find them, are a winter luxury. In summer, a slice of bread spread with dripping or a scrap of cheese will do. Foraged fruit is fair game. Apples, if you're lucky. Or the mysterious hedge berries that nobody quite knows the name of, but everyone swears won't kill you if you eat them slowly. Even in these lean times, sweets remain a cherished treat. Birthdays, holidays, and good report cards might bring a rare handful of bonbons or a coveted humbug. For some, the real adventure is not in eating, but in dreaming, pressing their faces to the glass, swapping stories about the greatest sweet ever tasted, and vowing that one day, when they're rich, they'll buy a whole jar. If you're lucky, your penny sweet will leave you only with sticky fingers and a sugar rush. If you're not, you'll remember the lesson in every crunch of sand, every suspicious aftertaste, and every trip to the privy. Guts of steel? Absolutely. Because in Victorian England, childhood was survival. One snack at a time. Next up, the mysterious world of preserved goods, where every tin is a gamble and every jar could hold glory or a small, briny disaster. Victorian groceries are full of surprises. Canned foods often rust or leak lead, and preserved fruits hide more bugs than nutrients. Every tin opens a new adventure, and sometimes a new infection. Step inside the Victorian corner shop, where innovation collides with optimism, and the shelves are lined with tins, jars, and bottles promising convenience, comfort, and just a hint of existential risk. For the busy Londoner, preserved foods are a modern miracle, a way to enjoy peaches in January or beef stew without ever seeing a cow. Of course, what's inside the tin is anyone's guess, and what's not listed on the label could fill a medical textbook. Let's start with the canned goods, the pride of Victorian food technology and a reliable source of both calories and mild panic. The process sounds simple. Seal cooked meat or fruit in a tin. Keep out the air, and presto. Food that lasts for months, even years. But these are not the cans you know today. Early tins are heavy, handmade affairs, soldered shut with generous globs of lead. As you turn your can in the light, you notice a crust of rust, forming at the seams and the faint bulge that suggests fermentation is happening inside, whether you like it or not. Opening a Victorian tin is an adventure in itself. There are no pull tabs or can openers, just a sharp knife, a firm grip, and a prayer that the contents won't erupt across the kitchen like a Jackson Pollock in gravy. Sometimes the lid peels back with a satisfying hiss. Sometimes it resists, finally giving way to reveal what? Exactly. Meat stewed to the texture of sponge, swimming in a gelatinous pool, or fruit suspended in syrup so thick it could grout tiles. Occasionally, you find something unidentifiable, half a plum maybe, or a mysterious lump that might once have been beef. If you're very lucky, there's only a faint metallic tang. If not, there's a distinct fizz, the warning sign of Victorian botulism. And what about the preserved fruit? It comes in sturdy jars, sealed with wax or, sometimes, just a tightly twisted cloth. The fruit looks inviting, plums, cherries, or currants swimming in syrup, ready to top a rare bowl of pudding, but peer a little closer, and you might spot movement. Fruit flies, weevils, and beetles thrive in the warm, sweet preserves. Victorian cooks tried their best to strain the bugs out, but a certain crunchiness was accepted as part of the experience. After all, extra protein never hurt anyone, except perhaps the more squeamish members of the household. Pickles and chutneys, the other stars of the preserved goods aisle, are just as unpredictable. The vinegar is sharp enough to pickle your insides, and the vegetables are sliced so thin you wonder if they were just using up scraps. Labels are vague, expiration dates non-existent, and the best before test is a matter of sniffing, poking, and, if you're brave, tasting. The old joke goes, if it doesn't bite back, it's probably fine. Of course, every Victorian family has a horror story. A Christmas pudding ruined by an explosive can of plums, a picnic derailed by tinned salmon that glowed in the dark, or a fruitcake that buzzed ominously when sliced. You learn to approach every preserved good with a blend of hope and suspicion. The true experts, grannies, housekeepers and shopkeepers, know all the tricks. Tap the can to listen for hissing, check the jar for unusual colors, and never trust anything that fizzes, pops, or floats. Despite the risks, preserved goods are treasured. They offer a taste of summer in the bleakest months and a moment of novelty on an otherwise monotonous menu. Children dream of candied peel and jam, and adults sneak a bite of pickled onions when no one's looking. And sometimes, against all odds, the contents of the tin are fresh, flavorful, and downright delightful. So you slice a piece of tinned ham, spread preserved cherry on your bread, and raise a forkful of brined pickle in salute to Victorian ingenuity. The food may not always be safe, but it is, at the very least, an adventure. Next up, the great jam scam, because if you thought preserved goods was suspicious, wait until you meet Victorian jelly. You buy a jar of jam and dream of strawberries. What you get is apple cores, beet pulp, red dye, and enough sugar to make your dentist weep. It spreads, but so does the rash. The Victorian breakfast table, in theory, is a scene of comfort. A pot of tea steaming gently, a loaf of bread, see chalk and brick dust. And, if you're truly fortunate, a jar of bright, jewel-toned jam. The sight alone is enough to make you believe, if only for a moment, that all is right in the world. You pop the lid and marvel at the glossy red gleam inside. Perhaps you even let yourself imagine the taste of summer strawberries, raspberries, or maybe even currants, if you're feeling extravagant. But this is Victorian England, and you really should know better by now. The art of the Victorian jam is less about fruit and more about illusion. Real berries are expensive, and no Victorian grocer worth his salt is about to squander profits on authenticity when he can replicate the look and, sort of, the flavor with whatever is cheapest. The primary ingredient in most fruit jams, apple cores. Not apples, mind you, but the bits left over after everything edible has been sliced away for pies, crisps, or the lunchboxes of luckier children. Beet pulp is next, adding body, bulk, and a color best described as red adjacent. And then comes the dye, to fool the eye, if not the taste buds. Victorian jam makers reach for the nearest chemistry set. Red dye from coal tar, a splash of carmine for the wealthy, or a bit of lead oxide if you're after that truly unforgettable sheen. The result is a jam that glows so vividly it could double as a warning signal for ships in the fog. It looks inviting, even decadent, but the first spoonful is where reality sets in. As you spread your strawberry jam on a hunk of suspicious bread, you quickly notice the texture. It's gritty, stringy, and slightly lumpy. You might find a stray seed or a suspicious chunk of something that never saw a berry bush. The flavor is overwhelmingly sweet, enough to make your teeth ache on contact, followed by an aftertaste of old apple and, sometimes, a faint hint of bitterness that you hope is just beetroot and not the ghost of industrial byproducts. If you're lucky, there's enough sugar to drown out the chemical tang. If not, well, let's hope you have a glass of questionable milk on standby. Sometimes, the surprises are even more tangible. A chunk of wood or a fragment of string from the bottom of the jam pan, or an insect that braved the boiling process. If the label says with added fruit pieces, you should ask yourself, fruit, or just whatever happened to fall in. Victorian jam is nothing if not a democratic food. Everyone and everything gets a chance to join the party. Of course, the health effects are legendary. A rash after eating jam is almost a rite of passage. Victorian doctors blame everything from unwholesome fruit to nervous temperament. But you know it's probably the dye, or the bucket of preservatives, which could include everything from benzoic acid to a casual sprinkle of alum. The lucky ones just get an upset stomach. The unlucky end up with a visit to the apothecary, who prescribes a week of weak tea and dry toast. Despite it all, jam is cherished. It brings colour to grey mornings and a taste of sweetness to otherwise bland meals. Children beg for it. Adults hoard it. And every family has a favourite sauce. The shop with the thickest spread, the prettiest jars, or the most consistent lack of foreign objects inside. On special days, if you're lucky or rich, you get actual fruit. And the taste of real strawberries is almost shocking after so many months of Applebee's surprise. You finish your toast, jam glistening, and promise yourself you'll be more discerning next time. But you know the truth. In the world of Victorian junk food, every jar is a gamble, every spread a surprise. Next up, cheese of uncertain origin, because if you think jam was a risk, just wait until you meet what's lurking in the cheese press. You fancy a piece of cheese, wrapped in muslin and aged in someone's damp basement. The blue veins are supposed to be there probably. The smell? That's just extra protein. In the dim, cluttered corners of a Victorian grocer's shop, the cheese counter is less a display and more an experiment in microbial endurance. Rounds and wedges of cheddar, Stilton, and dubious local specialties rest on wooden shelves, their rinds darkening in the perpetual cool damp of the cellar. No refrigeration, just hope and the belief that a little mold builds character. You survey the choices, breathing through your mouth, as much to avoid the scent as to preserve your sense of adventure. Selecting cheese is an act of faith. Your grocer, wiping his hands on an apron that's seen better decades, points out his finest piece, a wedge marbled with a bloom of blue and green. That's what gives it flavour, he assures you, as if the mark of a healthy cheese is its ability to frighten away mice and small children. Some cheeses are smooth and rubbery, others crumbly and dotted with what can only be described as bonus textures. You ask what kind it is, and he replies with a wink, "Oh, that's farmhouse. Family recipe." You wisely don't ask whose family. Cheese in the Victorian age is rarely just cheese. The milk, questionable at best, might have come from a cow, a goat, or anything available on short notice. The curds are pressed in rough cloths, aged on wooden planks that double as cutting boards and, on occasion, mouse highways. Salt is added liberally when it's available. Sometimes the salt is replaced with preserving powder, a mystery blend that could include borax, alum, or whatever the grocer found at the bottom of the barrel. Each wheel is a unique chemical romance, a living diary of its time and place. Cutting into your cheese, you marvel at the resilience of Victorian taste buds. The blue veins snake through the wedge, bold and unapologetic, their scent stinging the nose. Is it safe? Probably. Is it delicious? That depends on your definition of adventure. In an era when food preservation is a desperate improvisation, mold is less an enemy and more a companion, sometimes lending a sharp, creamy bite, sometimes announcing its presence with a tang best described as medicinal. Occasionally, you encounter mite cheese. Beloved by a few and feared by many. These are cheeses deliberately colonized by cheese mites. Tiny, nearly invisible creatures that gnaw through rinds, leaving behind a distinctive texture and an even more distinctive odor. The bravest souls eat the rind as a badge of honor. The rest carve deep, seeking an oasis of safety beneath the surface. Cheese is a staple, rich in fat and protein, and cheap enough to fill a laborer's bread at midday. Even the poorest homes keep a sliver tucked away, to be grated over bread or mashed into potatoes. If you're truly unlucky, you get a slice that walks on its own, courtesy of a few too many days in the cellar, and the efforts of enthusiastic maggots. Resourceful Victorians simply scrape off the moving bits, slap the rest on bread, and call it a meal. Waste not. Want not. But cheese, for all its quirks, is cherished. It's a source of pride, the centerpiece of feasts, and a comfort on bleak winter days. Paired with strong ale or a hunk of dry bread, it rounds out meals and lifts spirits. Even the children, wrinkling their noses, beg for a corner from the cutting board, picking away the green but savoring the rich, tangy heart within. As you finish your piece, eyes watering, palate tingling, you realize that in Victorian England, every bite is a leap of faith. Cheese is not just food. It's a memory, a gamble, and sometimes a dare. Tomorrow, perhaps you'll choose something safer, but tonight, you sleep fortified with calcium, courage, and a strong sense of self-preservation. Next up, the perilous promise of street fruit, where shine doesn't mean safety, and you're never quite sure what's beneath the skin. You step inside a working-class eatery and order the special. It arrives lukewarm, slimy, and staring back at you with a hint of malice. You eat quickly, eyes on the exit. There's a certain thrill in Victorian dining out, the kind that comes with a dash of danger and the faint hope that your meal might not immediately fight back. The greasy spoon, a humble institution beloved by factory workers, laborers, and anyone brave enough to risk their shilling for a hot meal, is the very definition of culinary roulette. You push open the battered door, greeted by the mingled aromas of burnt lard, boiled cabbage, and something you'd rather not identify. Tables wobble, windows sweat with steam, and a single oil lamp does battle with the London gloom. The menu is chalked on a board by the door, but its accuracy is optimistic at best. Today's special. Stew could mean anything from questionable mutton to last week's leftovers, stretched with turnip, rutabaga, and a heroic amount of thickening flour. The cook, apron stained, sleeves rolled, scowl fixed, ladles a portion into a chipped bowl. A rainbow sheen on the surface hints at fats from many generations of mystery meat, while an unidentifiable object bobs for attention. Cutlery, if provided, is a grab bag of battered forks and spoons bent at strange angles, their history written in every dent. You glance around. Diners are hunched over their bowls, chewing with a resignation born of long days and limited choices. Conversation is minimal. The language of the greasy spoon is mostly in shrugs and the shuffling of feet under the table. Every dish here is an adventure in improvisation. The stew, when poked, reveals a landscape of cartilage, potato, and the occasional dubious sausage. Salt is the saving grace, and vinegar, if available, can mask all but the most determined flavors. Bread is served on the side. Tough, day-old, and best used for scraping the bowl, or, in desperate times, bracing a wobbly table leg. If you're lucky, the gravy is mostly water. If you're unlucky, it's mostly grease. Hygiene is a spectator sport. Dishes are rinsed in tepid water between customers. Soap is a suggestion. not a requirement. The cook wipes her hands on her apron, brushes crumbs from the table onto the floor, and goes right back to chopping onions, sometimes with the same knife she used on raw meat earlier. The air vibrates with the hum of flies who have declared squatters' rights and show no sign of paying rent. Vegetables are technically present, but mostly in spirit. Overcooked cabbage, a single limp carrot, or peas so grey they might once have been green. Everything is boiled until it's soft enough to eat without teeth, a blessing for those who've lost theirs to earlier encounters with bread, candy, or fate. Sometimes there's pudding, a heavy spongy wedge studded with currants and shrouded in a mysterious syrup. Dessert is optional. Digestion not guaranteed. Still, the greasy spoon has its charms. For a few pennies, you leave warmer and fuller than you arrived, and there's a camaraderie among those who share the risks of dining out. The regulars know the secrets, which days to avoid the special, how to angle your seat to avoid the perpetual leak in the ceiling, and where to hide your bread so the cook doesn't reclaim it for the next customer. As you mop up the last traces of stew with your bread, you catch the eye of another diner. There's a moment of silent understanding. We've survived another meal. Maybe you'll make it through the afternoon with just a grumble or two from your gut. Maybe not. Either way, you nod in solidarity, pay your penny, and slip out into the fog, grateful for the small mercies, a full stomach, a brief rest, and the lingering mysterious taste of adventure. Next up, the street fruit seller and the hazards of eating something that looks healthy but almost certainly isn't. Sweet dreams if your dinner lets you. You hear whispers about the famous pie men, vendors so notorious for stuffing their pastries with every part of an animal except the meat. The crust might be flour, or it might be sawdust. The flavor? Suspense. Step into the shadowy world of Victorian street pies, where the pie man reigns supreme, a master of disguise, deception, and dubious culinary innovation. You catch the scent of warm pastry drifting down the street, a heady blend of grease, pepper, and the faintest whiff of something you desperately hope is edible. The pie man's bell rings out, summoning hungry workers, children, and anyone with a penny and a flexible definition of meat. The pies look golden and inviting, their flaky crusts promising comfort and satisfaction. But in Victorian England, pie is always a gamble. You hand over your coin, receive a hot, palm-sized pastry, and prepare for the mystery within. The first bite is always the most honest, flaky, salty, piping hot, and filled with optimism. Then you hit the filling. Instead of beef, chicken, or mutton, you find a medley of textures. Something stringy, something gelatinous, a chewiness that defies classification. There's plenty of gravy, thick, peppery, and alarmingly opaque. Meat is present, technically, though it may have entered the pie as a distant cousin to the original animal. Let's talk ingredients. Pie men were notorious for their ingenuity and thrift. Nothing went to waste. Heads, feet, skin, sinew, and organs all found their way into the grinder. In lean times, rat, cat, and anything acquired from the alley might bolster the recipe. For extra substance, vendors bulked out the filling with breadcrumbs, potato peelings, or whatever scraps the butcher swept up that morning. One London magistrate famously declared that eating a street pie was an exercise in optimism and iron constitution. And then there's the crust. Flour was expensive and closely monitored by hungry authorities, so pie men often improved their dough with sawdust, chalk, or even ground bone. If your pie was extra crunchy, you might have found a little grit or a splinter from the bakery's workbench. A golden brown crust was achieved with a brush of egg, when available, or, more commonly, a dab of lard mixed with brown dye. It gleamed invitingly under the gas lamps, lulling customers into a false sense of security. Of course, the art of the pie man wasn't just about cost-cutting, it was about staying ahead of suspicion. Pies were seasoned liberally with pepper, salt, and sometimes a squirt of dubious sauce to mask any inconsistencies in the filling. On especially bad days, vendors simply doubled down on gravy, letting the mysterious meat swim anonymously, safe from questioning eyes. Ask what's inside, and you'll get a wink, a shrug, and a gentle reminder not to worry so much. After all, the crust is the best part. Yet, for all the scandal, pie was beloved. It was hot, portable, and filling. A meal you could eat with one hand while clinging to your dignity with the other. The risk was part of the appeal. Everyone had their own theory about the best pie man in town, the stalls to avoid, and the day-old pies best left for the stray dogs. Children swapped horror stories about what was found in the filling, buttons, feathers, the occasional tooth. Rumors of food fraud weren't just urban legends. Periodic scandals broke out. Pigs' heads smuggled in from slaughterhouses. Reports of tainted pies causing outbreaks of food poisoning. And exposés in the penny press revealing recipes best left unprinted. Yet, the pie men persisted. London's appetite for cheap, hot food outweighed concerns about provenance. If you survived lunch, you could count yourself among the lucky. You finish your pie, uncertain whether you've eaten beef, mystery animal, or the remnants of a carpenter's workshop. But you're full, the day feels a bit warmer, and you've participated in a uniquely Victorian ritual, eating food that's equal parts comfort, surprise, and dare. Next up, the health inspector's worst nightmare, the infamous Victorian fish shop, where catch of the day means whatever washed up last. Sweet dreams, if your pie lets you sleep. After a day spent eating your way through the Victorian snackscape, you begin to wonder, how did anyone survive? Maybe the human stomach is tougher than we think. Or maybe, after all this, you'll finally get some sleep, if you don't start glowing in the dark. Let's take a moment to marvel at the ironclad resilience of the Victorian digestive tract, a feat of evolution, necessity, and sheer stubbornness. Each meal in 19th century England is a high-wire act without a safety net. Pies filled with mystery meat, bread laced with chalk and bone dust, candy that glows with the promise of heavy metals, and dairy products that are only fresh in the loosest sense of the word. You'd think mass extinction was inevitable. And yet, somehow, millions of Victorians soldiered on, day after questionable day. The secret, adaptation and, frankly, a lack of options. If you grew up on a steady diet of borderline edible food, your body developed defenses. Children learned early not to question the strange tingle of a green potato, the fizz in their milk, or the surprising crunch in their sweets. Each exposure was a lesson, and the kids who survived repeated doses of arsenic-laced candies or pickled pig's feet, developed an enviable immunity or, at the very least, a philosophical resignation. Victorian guts were not coddled. From infancy, even the wealthiest children sampled the same adulterated food as their poorer peers, just with fancier spoons. Boiled water, when available, was safer than the Thames, but most people relied on beer or weak tea to wash down the day's hazards. The lucky ones avoided the worst outbreaks of cholera and typhoid. The rest were written up in the medical journals, serving as cautionary tales and statistics in public health debates. But make no mistake, Victorian Londoners did get sick, frequently. The city's apothecaries and chemists made a brisk trade in remedies for disordered stomach, summer complaint, and the ever-popular biliousness. Housewives swapped home cures for food poisoning, and entire families swore by mysterious herbal tinctures that tasted worse than the food they were supposed to fix. Surviving dinner was as much about hope and habit as about health. Still, there's a perverse pride in this toughness. Working-class men boasted about their ability to eat street pies without consequence. Factory girls dared each other to try the most lurid penny sweets. Grandmothers bragged about the time I ate a cheese that could have chased a cat up a chimney. The ability to digest nearly anything became a mark of character, a badge of honor, in a world where food safety was an aspiration, not a reality. Modern science, with its microscopes and germ theories, has revealed the true extent of the risk. But Victorians, blissfully unaware of such things, trusted in tradition, a quick prayer, and the hope that boiling, pickling, or drowning something in sugar would render it harmless. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't. Either way, life went on, and so did dinner. The resilience of the Victorian gut was more than just biology. It was cultural, communal, and at times just plain denial. When your daily life includes the threat of disease, poverty, and endless labor, you don't let a little thing like luminous candy or a mysterious pie filling slow you down. You eat, you adapt, and you keep going, grateful for every meal that leaves you stronger than before. So, as you lay your weary head down tonight, stomach rumbling gently from its brush with history, remember, the human spirit and the human stomach are tougher than you think. You might not glow in the dark, but you've survived a tour through the culinary wilds of the Victorian era. And that, dear listener, is something to digest. Next up, time to tuck yourself in and give thanks for modern food labels, refrigeration, and the luxury of complaining about processed snacks. Sleep well, knowing that your gut, like the Victorians, is up for the challenge. The day begins with a weak cup of tea and a hunk of bread, if you're lucky. For the ambitious, there's porridge cooked in a battered tin pot that hasn't been properly cleaned since last Michaelmas. The local grocer swears by his secret ingredient, flour laced with whitening agents and, on especially exciting days, a sprinkle of lead to keep it looking fresh. You dig in, comforted by the fact that the only thing more dangerous than breakfast is skipping it. The Victorian morning is a slow, grey affair, best faced with the promise, however faint, of something to eat. You wake to a kitchen that's chilly and smoky, a fire smouldering in the grate, and your first thought is not, what's for breakfast, but what survived the night. You peer into the bread bin, hopeful, only to find a hunk of yesterday's loaf, hard as brick and sporting a suspicious dusting of powder. That powder, of course, isn't flour at all, but bone dust, chalk, or the latest in whitening innovations. On good days, the bread is merely stale. On bad days, it's a crumbling hazard to dental work and digestion alike. If you're especially hungry and brave, there's always porridge. This isn't the creamy, oat-rich bowl of modern comfort. Victorian porridge is a grainy, beige sludge, cooked in a tin pot that's seen decades of use and abuse. The pot sits on the hob, encrusted with the ghosts of breakfasts past, imparting a complex vintage flavor to every scoop. There might be oats, barley, or whatever grains were cheapest at the market, and a swirl of milk, if the milkman's morning delivery hasn't already gone sour. Sweetener is a luxury, treacle, molasses, or even a spoonful of brown sugar when you can find it. More often, you rely on imagination and hope. And what about that tea? The cornerstone of every Victorian table. It's brewed with leaves that have probably already been through a few cups before. If you're thrifty, or just realistic, you dry and reuse the leaves, sometimes mixing in a little fresh grass or coloured sloe leaves for bulk. The colour is right, the taste is historic. You take it weak, with a little milk to cloud the view and enough sugar to grit your teeth. If you can't get sugar, you might find yourself nibbling a sugar cube or a gypsum imposter, sold by enterprising grocers who know that luxury is often just an illusion. Sometimes breakfast means extras, cold bacon fat, scraped from the bottom of yesterday's pan, spread thinly over bread. A scrap of cheese, if you're fortunate, sliced so thin you can see the sun through it. Not that the sun ever comes out long enough to try. On very special days, you might have a boiled egg, pickled, rubbery, and dyed slightly blue by a mysterious brine. The dangers of breakfast aren't just in the ingredients, but in the cookware. Lead-glazed mugs, pewter spoons, tin plates that leach a little something extra into your meal with every scrape. If you're lucky, the worst you'll get is a metallic aftertaste. If not, you'll be joining the legions of Victorians for whom stomach upset was a way of life. Still, skipping breakfast isn't an option. The day ahead, long hours in a mill, a shop, or the open air, demands energy, no matter the source. Parents urge their children to eat up, aware that a bad breakfast is still better than an empty stomach. Children learn early not to question the taste, to chew quickly, and to never, ever ask what the secret ingredient really is. Yet, despite the dangers, breakfast brings its own rituals and comforts. The clink of tin mugs, the scrape of knives on bread, the first warm mouthful on a cold morning. Even a hazardous meal is a chance to gather, to brace for the day, and to remind yourself that you've survived another night, and you might just survive the food as well. As you swallow the last gritty bite, you take a deep breath, sip the last of your questionable tea, and prepare to face the Victorian day. After all, if breakfast doesn't finish you off, nothing will. Next up, what really went into Victorian soup? Because there's always room for one more mystery in the bowl. A river runs through the city, and the bravest or least discerning souls flock to the oyster stalls lining the banks. Oysters are cheap, plentiful, and have a 50-50 chance of taking you out before supper. Unrefrigerated shellfish bask in the sun, absorbing all the flavors the Thames has to offer, mainly the flavor of cholera. Still, you slurp one down and hope for the best. It's either a taste of the sea or a fast track to the local apothecary. Step right up to the banks of the Victorian Thames, where the air is thick with a cocktail of city smells, coal smoke, horse dung, and that special hint of low tide. There, alongside the cacophony of fishmongers and the shrieks of river gulls, you'll find the oyster man, a fixture of city life, with baskets piled high and a shucking knife never far from hand. His customers range from ragged street urchins to bowler-hatted clerks, all united by the same reckless optimism. In the 19th century, oysters were not the luxury treat they are today. They were the protein of the people, plentiful, cheap, and endlessly renewable, as long as you weren't picky about the occasional crunch of grit or the possibility of a rogue parasite. Victorians could devour a dozen oysters for the price of a loaf of bread. Some even claimed they were nature's perfect snack, though nature, in this case, had a truly twisted sense of humor. Let's talk freshness. Modern refrigeration is a fantasy, and the only thing keeping oysters cool is the damp breeze and the seller's creative storytelling. The river is a dubious blessing, teeming with shellfish, but also every variety of city runoff, chemical waste, and the, personal contributions of half of London. The Thames delivers oysters by the bucket load, and, just as generously, serves up typhoid, cholera, and a symphony of invisible threats. But the risk only adds to the allure. If you can eat an oyster and live to tell the tale, you've earned your bragging rights. The act of eating is part performance, part dare. The oysterman pries open a shell, revealing the glistening, quivering flesh inside. He might add a squirt of vinegar, a shake of pepper, or, for those with a truly strong stomach, a dollop of the mysterious oyster sauce. You tip your head back, slide the oyster down, and feel a rush of cold brine, metallic and just a bit too alive. If it slips down easily, congratulations. If it fights back, you may want to ask the nearest apothecary about their antidotes. But oysters are only the beginning. The riverside stalls also offer cockles, winkles, and mussels, each sold in paper cones or by the pint. These shellfish, too, have enjoyed their last moments, basking in the city sun, soaking up whatever London decided to send their way. The texture varies from soft to suspiciously crunchy, the flavor a blend of brine and possibility. The hardiest snackers chase them with pints of beer, reasoning that what the oyster doesn't kill, the ale will disinfect. Illness is part of the game. A bout of the runs is shrugged off as bad luck, and even a feverish night is just another story for the pub. Doctors caution against shellfish in hot weather, but warnings are mostly ignored. After all, a meal that's this cheap and this exciting can't be all bad, can it? And yet, shellfish are loved. For the poor, they're a rare source of protein. For the daring, they're a test of courage. Victorians gather at riverside stalls, swapping stories, jokes, and remedies. Oysters mark birthdays, holidays, and stolen moments of pleasure on the riverbank. Even those who swear never again after a night of regret find themselves back in line the next week, coin in hand and hope in heart. You finish your oyster, wipe your mouth, and listen to the bustle of the city. Maybe you'll be lucky. Maybe not. Either way, you've tasted Victorian history, a bite at a time, always with a side of suspense. Next up, the final word on Victorian junk food and a gentle reminder to appreciate every modern, slightly boring snack you enjoy. Sweet dreams and mind the shell fragments. So here we are, having survived a full day snacking our way through the Victorian underbelly. Maybe your teeth are a little wobbly, your stomach is threatening to unionize, and you're questioning everything you ever thought you knew about candy. But you made it. And that, in the grand tradition of human stubbornness, is something worth celebrating. Take a moment, lying in your safe, clean bed, with your filtered water and your reassuringly non-toxic snacks. Maybe send a silent thank you to the generations before you. Those tough, reckless souls who looked at a green bonbon, a crusty pie, or a glass of fizzing milk and said, how bad could it be? These people survived by accident, luck, and digestive tracts forged in adversity. They're the reason we have food safety laws, ingredient labels, and the confidence to eat bread without first sniffing it suspiciously. Remember, history isn't just about kings, queens, or revolutions. It's also about ordinary people dodging food poisoning long enough to invent afternoon tea. If they could handle arsenic-laced sweets, you can probably handle a tough week at work. Life may still be absurd, but at least your ketchup isn't medicinal, and your snacks don't glow in the dark, unless you're eating them in front of the refrigerator at 2 a.m., in which case, more power to you. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, let the chaos of Victorian junk food fade away. Take comfort in your cozy sheets, your modern snacks, and the gentle knowledge that, whatever the day brings, at least you're not washing down chalky bread with formaldehyde milk. You've earned your rest. Good night.